Welcome to Breaking the Narrative, a Stand With Us Canada podcast. I'm your host, Jesse Primorano, and in each episode, we'll dive into the fight against antisemitism and the delegitimization of Israel. From student leaders to community advocates, we'll explore how people are standing up and making a difference. New episodes drop every other Thursday, so let's get into this week's conversation. Welcome back to episode 3 of Breaking the Narrative, a Stand With Us Canada podcast. I'm Jesse Primorano, and I'm very excited to be sitting here today with Elica Le Bon. Elica, welcome to our show.
Thank you.
We spoke last night in front of 550 people in Toronto, and unfortunately we were fully sold out, and I got a number of emails from people asking if we could live stream it. They wanted to hear from you. They were so curious, so now they can. We got our podcast, and really excited for those that weren't able to join us last night to hear from you tonight. So my apologies to those of you that were with us last night, because some of this you might have heard already. But I want to just start by talking a little bit about your journey, Elica. Let's jump right in. As I keep saying to you, for many of us, you sort of appear on our Instagram feed out of the blue. You really took us all aback with your articulate nature, your intelligence, your convictions. But tell us a bit more about you. What brought you to that place? What was your journey like? I know, obviously, your family left Iran under, difficult circumstances. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
My dad was already out of Iran by the time the revolution happened in 1979. He was already in the UK studying at Oxford, and my mum was in Iran at the time. And my mum's family and everyone was in Iran, and she was taken to Evin prison, which is the notorious prison, and my aunt was taken to prison, and my uncle, who is her husband, and my aunt was pregnant at the time, and then so my mum and my aunt came out of prison, but they executed my uncle, and then my family left Iran after that time, came to London, and I think that just the whole circumstances around what happened in Iran was just a part of something that, we understood growing up. We understood terrorism, we understood jihadism, we understand, what that does to a country. And then, I started speaking up most prominently about Iran after the Masajina Amini revolution, or the Woman Life Freedom revolution in 2022. And then following on from that, October 7th, where, I guess I just kind of expected people to be on the same page and understanding what they had learned when we were talking about Iran, and just sort of failing to realize that this was all the same thing, and starting to come up with reasons and excuses for why this was a different form of terrorism, and that it basically put me in this position to have to try and explain to the world that terrorism is terrorism. Terrorism
is terrorism, except I guess in many cases when it's being applied to the Jewish people, or being inflicted upon the Jewish people. So do you come from a family of people like you that were loud, vocal people that spoke up, that spoke out against the regime, or were they imprisoned just simply because the regime was that brutal and everyday people were being locked up for not falling in line?
Exactly. Yeah.
And so what brought you to the US? You said you were in the UK.
So I came to the US to go to law school, actually. So I was in the UK, and then I decided I came to LA for the first time in 2013, and I met a whole bunch of people here that were in law school at the time. And I was doing a really good job of arguing with them. And they were like, why aren't you a lawyer? You should go to law school. And then so for a couple of years, people were, convincing me. And I was just like, I don't know. Ended up going to law school thinking like almost non-committal, almost. But then just became obsessed and just thrived, because I have ADHD. So when I was growing up in school, I never paid attention in school. When you have ADHD, you're just like either not there at all, or you're fully
oh yeah, you don't have to explain it to me, believe me, if anyone gets it.
So with law school, that was the first educational time in my life that I was just so committed and just deeply invested, and I was like, oh, I love this.
You found something that you really believed in that fueled you to stay connected and engaged.
I just loved everything about the law. And It's like the law is so many things, it's like, it's not just, contracts, it's life. Everything in the world is like crossing the road, right? Whether you can go or not is the law. Whether you have to put on a seatbelt, how you raise your kids, everything is the law, right? It's part of our society. It's like anthropology almost. So,
well, I'll take it a step further and say that not only is it part of our society, but it's a part of what you're doing every day, and it's a part of what allows us as human beings to quantify objectively what is right and what is wrong in our society, right? And so I'm glad you brought that up, because I was really taken aback. I feel like so many influencers in this space, influencer might be the wrong word, but speakers, people that are using a platform to speak up for Israel against the IRGC, whatever, but I don't often see the law being applied as their arguments. And I was really taken by your post referring and talking about the Bibis kids, and how Hamas had this parade, and they talked about how Bibi and his Nazi, army had killed these children, and you used the principles of the law to talk about explicitly why this was the fault of Hamas. How do you feel like your knowledge and awareness of the law has allowed you to see this situation a little bit more clearly than maybe others have?
So the good thing about the law is that it provides us a reference point, and just that's not to say that, look, we could of course talk about times where immoral things have been legal, but that's not the context that I'm talking about this now. In theory, the law is supposed to provide us a moral reference point, right? So what I had spoken about today was that Hamas had obviously done that propaganda parade where they had said that the Bibis children were killed by Netanyahu, and I kind of laid out the way that causation works, which was the but-for cause, which is that had Hamas not taken these babies, kidnapped them and taken them to Gaza, they wouldn't have been killed. And then the proximate cause, which is whether that type of harm was foreseeable, again taking kids into kidnapping these babies and taking them into a war zone, it was foreseeable that they would be harmed in that way, whether it was by starvation, whether it was because they couldn't find them, whether it was because they were in tunnels, whether it was bombardment, we don't know, but that was a foreseeable proximate cause. And so then you have, mens rea, actus reus, whatever. You had a guilty mind and guilty act, and all of that just proves the guilt, right, of the defendant, or Hamas in this case. And so we have these reference points in the law of how we interpret wrongdoing. And this is one of the things that people get so confused about, because when they don't understand that, they don't understand why things are not the same. Like they'll say, well, how is this different to kids who have been killed in war, in Gaza, for example, right? And it's not that any deaths are different. All deaths are the same, but the cause of those deaths are not the same. And that is what our criminal justice system is predicated on, right? Like, just to give an example, if you get in a car and somebody jumps out in front of you or whatever, let's just say, for example, and you end up killing them, versus whether if you get into a car and you drive into someone intentionally, one of them, there's no consequence, the other one is life in prison. Either way, both of those people have died as a result of your action. And
equally as tragic, right?
Equally as tragic, right? And I'm not making this as a comparison, mind you, because someone's going to say, oh, so are you saying no?
Well, they're always going to find something to say.
It's not an analogy. It's just trying to flesh this out so people can understand that even when there's been a death, the deaths are always equal, because death is death, suffering is the same, the loss is the same, the family grieves the same, and that's all true. But it's the intent that we analyze in the law. It is the intent that is the main question behind any crime. And not understanding that is why people fail to understand the difference between an intentional targeted terrorist attack and being killed in a war zone, essentially.
Right. And I think it's interesting the words you use, like to analyze the intent and then to say that they fail to understand. So they fail to understand because they refuse to analyze the intent, right?
Well, they don't have a framework to do it.
Well, they don't have a framework to do it. But at the same time, like, I'm not a lawyer, but I sit here every day and I wonder to myself, outside of the law, how so many people can be so blind to see, they're seeing evil as good and good as evil, right? They're siding with the terrorists who kidnapped toddlers and 9-month-old children rather than the 9-month-old children, right? So to me, I sit here and I can't understand it. And I feel like for you as a lawyer, you hear people all the time talking about international law and the way international law is applied to Israel and to Hamas. it must drive you insane to see people like just completely flipping things on their head and saying like, no, this is the law and this shows clearly that Israel is committing genocide. Yeah. You're also the only person who I know that has, you have quite an extensive resume, but you have two resumes. You have your real resume, and then you have the resume that's been drafted for you by the haters online, right? You're the only person, like I keep saying this, that's a Mossad agent and an IRGC agent at the same time. It's pretty impressive. So all this being said, how do you reconcile or reckon with this notion that people can be given facts? Like you can go and make that video, you can give them, but they refuse to acknowledge them unless they align with their personal feelings or viewpoints.
Yeah. So as I was saying yesterday when we were having this conversation, the programming is the reason why people aren't able, or I guess you could say programming is why people see everything through this particular lens, through this particular worldview, because the programming is what creates the worldview in the first place. The programming is what creates the worldview that there's oppressors in the world and there's the oppressed in the world, and the oppressors are the source of all evil, and the only way to be free from this inequality is to overthrow the oppressor in a violent revolution, right? So that's kind of the narrative, that's the ideology that has been created, and then people are programmed to dial into this narrative, and most people don't even know. And I think that's the craziest thing about it, because when I, was a lefty, I saw the world in the exact same way, and I don't think you could have convinced me that there was a reason why I saw it that way. I was like, but this is just the way the world is, right? And then I think once I started to become deprogrammed and I looked back, I was like, it's so crazy, because so much of what people are dialed into it's just not reality, it's just complete fiction. And so I think that's the thing that just makes people feel like they're living in a crazy world, is that you're looking at things in front of you that they're so obvious, but because people are dialed into fiction and they genuinely believe that the fiction that's in their mind is reality, it's just a complete disconnect.
Yeah, that's the scariest part. So I was going to go another direction, but I want to stay on this for a second. There's this, like you said, this belief that what they say or here is true, right? They don't think they're bad people. They don't think they're siding with terrorists. They believe that they're doing the right thing. I've heard you talk a lot this week about, education and the importance of education and information on a regular basis. And two, the inversion of history as we know it, right? That like we have professors, and not 21-year-old kids, grown men and women that are standing up in their classrooms and sharing a completely distorted, not even distorted, fictional characterization of Israel and the establishment of the state. So this is a very long question, but I'll summarize it and say, where's the connection between academic freedom and also drawing limitations to not allowing people to pervert our academia?
Yeah. I think, our concepts of free speech, I think this is something that isn't maybe discussed enough, is that our concepts of free speech were imagined at a time that we couldn't have imagined where technology would bring us. The whole idea, the whole concept of free speech was that no matter what somebody says, we can always challenge what they say with facts, with truth, all of that stuff. I don't think, certainly not by the founding fathers, I don't think there was ever an imagination that in the future at some point that there would be AI and there would be technology and there would be social media and there would be campaigns that could be coordinated to the extent that truth would be entirely lost, right? And not just that truth would be entirely lost, that an entire fiction could be generated to the extent that it could procure these types of revolutions that we've been seeing in the 20th and 21st century that have, resulted in bringing in authoritarian regimes around the world. And so I think everything is a balance, right? Of course, free speech is, and especially in the US, it's the First Amendment, one of the biggest priorities for any free, liberated, civilized society. But at the same time, we have to recognize what type of narratives, not just speech, but what type of narratives with very specific agendas behind them are just too dangerous to be part of the academic conversation. And right now, when we have in academia, we have professors that are trained Marxists, that are trained in proliferating this narrative of the oppressed and the oppressor, that is just really designed to foment these type of Marxist revolutions that have destroyed so many societies, right? Up until this point. I think that that's the point that we have to step in and regulate, to the extent that, it's not censoring free speech, but it's just that speech that is, or narratives that are extremely fictional and extremely dangerous, we need to have some type of regulation around.
Yeah, and it's just so interesting because I think we talk about Marxism, communism, socialism, like all of these, ideologies that got us as a civilization into trouble, right? And that created, like you talked about before, people who claimed they were doing this for the right reasons, but really were doing this to control a people. Yeah. And so I get nervous when I think about that, but at the same time, it's a lot scarier to live in a world where the truth can be whatever somebody decides it to be that day. And so, speaking about censoring the truth, I want to just go back to Iran for a couple of minutes, just to ask a couple more questions. The first one, before we even get there, I think that us as Canadians, whatever it is, we see problems, we are a little bit more timid to speak out. And we see people like you that are doing it with such courage. It gives us inspiration. And I think for many people listening to this podcast, that's one of the things they appreciate the most about you. It's not your intelligence. It's not what you talk about. It's the fact that you talk. It's the fact that you do it, and you do it in adverse circumstances. Anyone in my circle can speak up if you can speak up against the IRGC, right? So we talked about earlier today, the number of people that have had threats against them, but right in our community close to home, the Honorable Erwin Codler, who is the former special envoy for combating anti-Semitism and for Holocaust preservation. I might have gotten the title wrong. I probably did, but I promise, Erwin, we've got the
memory of the Holocaust,
yes.
Not the actual Holocaust.
No, preserving
the
memory.
To preserve.
No, but preserving Holocaust education, perhaps. There is a preserving in there. I promise you, he's preserving something, and it's certainly not the Holocaust.
He's not preserving Nazi Germany.
No, he's not preserving Nazi Germany, but he is preserving himself, because last year there was a very credible threat against his life that came from the not the threat. I mean, the threat was the IRGC, yes, because he had been speaking out so strongly against them. Where do you find the courage? Where do you find the strength, not only to start doing it, but to continue to do it every day?
I think, and I guess that's kind of one of the things about courage that's often maybe misunderstood, is that it's not that you don't feel the fear, it's that you feel the fear and do it anyway, right? So, and I don't know if there is an explanation or a reason. I think it's just an impulse that you have, is that you understand the danger, you recognize the danger, and but there's just something in you that's just it doesn't allow you to stop, even if you wanted to. It's something something that almost feels like it's bigger than you, and that's what I've always felt. And I said this last night as well, that no, actually I think I said this 2 nights ago, but the fact that I lost my country to this lie, and that we are seeing this same lie slowly destroy the last places that we have to be safe. And so it just, gets to a point where it doesn't feel like an option to do nothing, because if I do nothing, and if I say nothing, and if we all do and say nothing, then our society is going to end up the same way that Iran ended up, and that Russia and China and everywhere else, that North Korea, ended up in the same way.
It's the notion of one man walking into a room of 100 people with a gun, right? If everyone stops and freezes and stares at him, that's it. The whole room's going to end up with their hands tied behind their back, and that's going to be the end of that. But if one person takes a charge, and a second, and a third, and a fourth, then all of a sudden we're looking at a different calculus, right?
Absolutely.
So it's amazing to see and to hear what you're doing. Do you feel like there are enough voices from inside Iran that are doing the same?
Oh, inside Iran, yeah.
And outside of Iran?
No. Yeah, that's the funny thing, is that the people that are doing the most,
the ones who are under the greatest threat, are the ones speaking up the most. Yeah, because for them it's real life. For them it's every day. Yeah. And I hate to say it, for many people it's like, well, if I'm living in LA or New York, I can focus on other things. And not have to,
Or they just don't think the threat is that immediate. And that's another unfortunate side effect effect of these ideologies that have for so long taught people that, you know, the threat is overblown. The threat of the terrorists and the jihadists and the Islamic regime is all overblown. And that puts people in these situations, just like this has happened several times now, where I can't remember the name of the most recent woman who went to Iraq. I don't know if you know who I'm talking about. Jewish, Israeli. She was kidnapped by Hezbollah.
I should know this.
Well, anyway, this is so. What happens is that she's at Princeton, and her professors at Princeton, you know, suggest that she goes there, and you know, the political slant in, you know, very leftist organizations is that exactly that. Oh, you know, you'll be fine. It's just the right-wing crazies that tell you it's unsafe, you know. So she goes there, and she even reached out to Hezbollah to meet with them for an interview, really thinking that, you know, what's the problem? And she's been kidnapped now. And before that, another Princeton student, Shi Wei Wang, went to Iran, exact same beliefs. Princeton told him, like, go there, do your dissertation, it's going to be fine. This is all just like right-wing propaganda. They're not monsters, they're not terrorists. So Shi Wei Wang, he's a Chinese-American, well, he was a student. He goes to Iran, he's kidnapped, he's held hostage or whatever, he's imprisoned. And he actually came out with another American, Michael White, during Trump's last term, or Trump got him out, I should say. They didn't voluntarily let him go. But then he comes out and he just does a complete 180, and he starts writing all of these articles, and he's like, my whole life I was led to believe that, you know, the terrorists were the good guys and we were the bad guys, and, you know, we've just totally overblown this threat. And he was like, no, like, these guys are monsters, they want to kill us. Everything that they're saying is true, everything the people of Iran are saying is true. And so this is exactly the problem, is that these ideologies are convincing people in the Western world that there really is no threat. And that's why people are so indifferent as well, because they're just like, oh, this is just anti, you know, whatever propaganda. It's Islamophobic and it's just propaganda, you know. They're taught to, you know, not to play down the alarm.
So let's talk about those ideologies for a second. What is it? And, you know, I know your answer and I loved it, and I was really, you know, I'm sure you're going to thrill listeners with that similar answer too, but what is it that draws this like progressive, this woke ideology? What is it that connects it at the hip with this fanatic sort of, with these terrorists, with terror, with ideology?
Yeah, so it has its roots in Marxism. So it started with the first Marxist revolution, which was the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. And that was with Lenin and his gang. And then you have Stalin and the Soviet Union, which, you know, turns into an authoritarian regime and one of the biggest, deadliest regimes, I guess, in history. And then these Marxist revolutions start popping up everywhere, from China to Cambodia, North Korea, Vietnam, and even Iran. You know, that was kind of the ideology that beget the revolution. And then at the same time, what you have, not at the same time, but then I guess around the 1960s and 1970s, you have the new left in America that's coming off of the heels of the civil rights movement, where, you know, understandably, because of what's happened in American history, there's a strong sense of anti-Americanism. But then what happens is that movement sort of starts to align with the Marxist movements, because then you have the Soviet Union sort of promulgating these ideologies of anti-Westernism, like, hey, you hate the West, we hate the West too. So everything is about anti-Westernism. And the Soviet Union sending out these disinformation agents, I think approximately 1 million or so was the number given by Mikhail Pachepa, who was one of the defectors of the Soviet Union secret police. And so then they're starting to pick up these ideologies in America and in the West. And then one of the things that's really fundamental to anti-Westernism is the need for this reactionary force that can destroy the West. And so that's where the alliance with the Islamists comes from, seeing the Islamists as that reactionary force that can destroy the West. And so that's, I guess, where that alliance began to be formed a couple of decades ago. And ever since then, you have the same characters that are coming out virtually every single time in support of, you know, celebrating 9/11, celebrating Osama bin Laden, and now celebrating October 7th.
Right. So effectively what you're talking about is this notion that, people that seek to sow discord in society manipulate and take advantage of those that feel some type of a need, whether it's working class, whether it's post-war eras, whether it's, right, they've identified a group that has a social need that they can sort of blame on somebody else, whether in the case of the Holocaust it's the Jews, or whether in the case of right now it's these imperialist American governments and the Canadian government, all these, and basically convince them they're the enemy and to side with radicals until it's too late for them to realize that they've picked the wrong side.
That's the playbook.
And it's interesting because when you look at the data and you talk about like who supports Hamas in America and you look at the numbers, you see like 19 to 24, 25 to 36, whatever it is. And the percentage just gets smaller as they get older because they've grown up and they've realized like, oh yeah, I was 21 in this like super kind of like hippie phase of my life where I wanted to be the change in the world, and somebody convinced me because I was naive of the wrong change, and I guess I don't have a question on that, but I just thought it was a really interesting thing to note. And I heard you say this yesterday, and I was really enthralled by your answer. So on a similar note, just talking about political ideologies, it was starting to feel very isolating for the Jewish and pro-Israel community for a while, because I think we felt like we were in this like vast minority and there was not anybody that was there with us and beside us. And I think as time's gone on, I've started to feel that change, right? And the way I'm feeling it now even more is I'm starting to see governments being elected, and you mentioned Trump, and that's the best example, they're elected, which means they are speaking on behalf of the people of their country, that are now taking action in support of our community, right? We saw the beginning of deportations for student visa holders in America that are glorifying terrorism on their campus. Beautiful, amazing stuff. Do you feel a little bit like the shift in political ideology, the political spectrum is happening right now before our eyes, that people are moving at least a little bit to the right as a result of the behavior of the left in the last 16 months?
Absolutely, 100%. And I think, look, anyway, society moves in pendulum swings anyway. Unfortunately, it is that way that we go from the extreme left to the extreme right to the extreme left. I don't know what it is that we just simply cannot find balance at all. Maybe we're all just still very tribal beings. But we are coming off of, I think we are experiencing a right lash based on the extremism of the left over the past couple of years. And I think this is something that I've actually been speaking about for years, even when I was deep in the left myself, where I was trying to tell people like, hey, this behavior is going to result in a right lash, right? I was saying this extreme cancel culture, the silencing of anyone who doesn't agree with you, just highly manipulative behavior in order to enforce the narrative, that's going to go the complete other way. And I think what happens over time, and I say that I would say this as well, when you cancel people, they don't disappear, right? You just keep canceling people, you keep canceling them, and what are they going to do? They're going to start to group up in the end, right? They're going to group up, and by the time you've cancelled everybody, you've created an army against you that at this point is bigger than you. And so I remember after when Trump won the election, and I can't remember who it was that had posted something, someone who was influential Democrat, and they posted something where they were talking about, Trump had won, and then it said something like, and to all the people that didn't vote for Kamala Harris, I no longer wish to be in relationship with you. And it was like, do you not see that that's why he won? You don't see that every single person that said something that you didn't like or you didn't understand or you didn't agree with, you said that you can no longer be in relationship with us, and those people became isolated and ostracized. that's why they turned around. Like, you still don't see that.
Well, where are they going to go?
Where else are they
you
gonna
tell
go?
them that they can't talk to you,
Right.
or if you tell them that they're racist or sexist or homophobic
Right.
because of their views, and again, not necessarily, I mean, if their views are racist, they're racist.
Yeah.
But I'm saying people would not agree with the prevailing viewpoint on a particular topic, and instead of discussing different opinions, labels and insults were thrown right away.
Well, I mean, it's even gotten to the stage now where it's like, so somebody posted something the other day, that someone who was a friend of mine, and she was posting about this guy that was, he was put on the no-fly list because he was suspected of terrorism. The FBI put him on the no-fly list, and she had made this whole podcast episode talking about this poor guy that he was put on the no-fly list, right? And I looked into a little bit, and it turns out that he had a meeting with a person who had been convicted of conspiring to blow up the downtown Portland Christmas tree. And when the FBI asked him about the meeting, he hesitated to answer why. So they put him on the no-fly list. Whatever. Apparently it's some huge wrong. They shouldn't have done this. I don't know. But I had left a comment where I was like, look, these narratives where you're constantly focusing on the injustice of a potentially wrongfully accused terrorist, but you have nothing to say about the millions of victims of jihad. This is so harmful to us. This is so harmful to Middle Eastern people, because every time we raise our voice against the jihadists, you're pushing this narrative that makes everybody say, oh, you're just Islamophobic. And against ourselves, you're racist against yourself, right? And so when I had left her this comment, whatever, and then she's, left me this long reply that, whatever, that, and then she starts deleting all of my comments and restricting me so people can't see my answers, where I'm saying to her, as a non-Middle Eastern person, as a white woman, right? I'm telling her what you're doing is harmful to Middle Eastern people. And she's blocking my voice from being heard, while at the same time fronting as the voice of the oppressed. And so it isn't just that they're blocking people who disagree with you because they're racist. They think that person's racist. It's even when we're telling you that you're the ones that are being racist at a certain point, they're blocking us from being heard. And so that tells you that it was never about racism. It was never about any of that. It was that I have the ideology, I have the dominant ideology. It is actually oppressive. Their ideologies are oppressive, because even when what you're saying harms us, we're not even allowed to tell you that it harms us, right? Because you block us and you delete our comments and you editorialize so that you get to win the argument. And that's what it's always been about with them. And that's what's so nefarious about it. It's not this innocuous, oh, I just really mean well and I really care about people. You don't. You just have to win the ideology at anyone's cost.
Well, I think that's what it became. It became the competition of who had the highest moral ground, right? Who is the most moral, virtuous person? It's called moral grandstanding. Right, it's moral grandstanding. Thank you. And you look at our communities here in the West, and people have taken on causes that they know nothing about because they've seen it come to the spotlight and wanted to be in that spotlight and doing the right things. And when you talk about, we used the word perversion before, but you look at the Free Palestine movement, right? Prior to October 7th, I believe that, of course, there was lots of anti-Semitism in that movement, but for the vast majority of people there, they were there for the right reasons. They believed in freedom and self-determination for the Palestinian people. Yeah. Since October 7th, it became a platform and a space for Jew haters to come and to spew their rhetoric without being frowned upon by anybody, because they'd be surrounded by people that love them, right? So we talk about that movement and the way it's been perverted, and you talk about the fact that these white Canadians are trying to talk about what's best for a Palestinian living in Gaza when they've never even been to the Middle East at all. And then similarly too, with we were talking about on the progressive side of the political spectrum right now, is this notion that progressive politics are supposed to be a very good thing. It's supposed to be the people that are looking out for the rest of society, that are considering those who need our support, whether within our communities or without. But somehow it's turned into a place where it's the opposite, where they tell people who don't fit in with their notions and ideas that they're wrong. It's like the same idea as racism and sexism as anything else. If you say you're black, you're a woman, you're homosexual, and you're wrong, well, now we're being told if you don't agree with our viewpoints, you're wrong, right?
Exactly.
We're being equally ostracized.
And you know, the way that you know that it was never about that as well is the fact that when they say, oh, we're doing this for people of color, for LGBTQ, whatever, and then we need to put them into these spaces and we need to hear their voices. But when their voices disagree with them, they're like, oh no, you have to disappear. And it's like, okay, so now we've realized that the common denominator isn't race or sex or sexuality or any of those things. It's that they have to agree with you. And so it's like the mask is coming off at this point. It was never about that.
Actually about
because
that.
if it was about that, you would say, you know what? This is a Middle Eastern woman, a black woman, an Asian woman, whatever she has to say, that's her right. I just need her to be seen. But what they say is, if you say the wrong thing, you got to go.
Right. And also forget like the right. What happened to this world where people feel so comfortable speaking on behalf of somebody else,
Exactly.
right? That I'm getting DMs from people about you coming to Canada and being like, well, I don't know, her story, this, that, whatever. It's like, you're a white person sitting on your couch in Toronto. Don't speak for this Middle Eastern, this Iranian woman's experience and what she's gone through, what she's felt. Let's let her come and do that herself.
Exactly.
Which is why I'm glad that you did. And it's disappointing. I mean, to see, like I said, you know, the way these movements have changed, and I think it's mostly disappointing because I believe in what they believe in at their core, right?
Yeah.
Like every Jewish person here, in my circles at the very least, not every. I mean, there's always extremism in every group. Mm-hmm. The vast majority of Jews just want peace and quiet, right? They don't mind living next to the Palestinians because we live next to Arabs and Muslims on every other border we have. Mm-hmm. We know we can coexist. We have peace with some of our neighbors. Mm-hmm. You'll never see somebody at an Am Yisrael Chai protest in Toronto, you know, calling for the destruction of the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, I like this word, it's treasonous if you're in this pro-Palestinian movement to say anything but from the river to the sea.
Exactly.
Coexistence is not. Yeah. So can we speak to that a little bit to that? Like, what do you think drives that movement to be so unwilling to share, to talk, to discuss? Their faces are covered at every rally. You go and try to confront them at the encampment and their security comes to block you. Like, what is it that they're so invested in protecting you from?
Because it's never been about Palestine. It's never been about Palestinians. It's that every single one of these movements, whether it's BLM or Palestine or LGBTQ or whatever it is, it's just a front for their cause. And their cause has its roots in Marxism, which has its intention of a revolution. And so they know that they can't just come out into the streets and say, we want a revolution where we kill everyone to get our, social structure established to the rest of the world. And people think that these people just have bleeding hearts, when in reality they have something completely different in mind. And the way that you know that to be true is when, as we mentioned earlier, that you have these groups like SJP in Columbia University blocking Palestinian voices that are saying like, hey, can you not support Hamas? And I had posted something about that a while back, where there was like 5 or 7 Palestinians that they had blocked, Yemenis asking them not to support the Houthis, Iranians asking them not to support the IRGC, because the reality is that it's never about Palestinians, it's never about Middle Eastern people, it's never about oppressed people. It is about the fact that they need to use these causes to further their own ideologies, and anyone who threatens that ideology, even if it's the person that they're pretending to speak up for, has got to go.
It's like the most hysterical concept. I mean, I shouldn't say that because there's nothing funny about it, but it really breaks my brain sometimes trying to understand this notion of like, there's a person right in front of you telling you she is from Gaza and she does not. They're destroying their own people effectively, right?
Well, I mean, this is me trying to tell the woman earlier that this is not helpful to the Middle East, and she's blocking me when it's like claiming to speak up for it just doesn't, it's a front. It's just a front.
And I think that's very, very important to understand. I think that for a lot of people, we knew anti-Semitism existed, we knew anti-Zionism existed, but the last 16 months were like a very terrifying sort of awakening for us to realize like, oh, whoa, there's a lot of people that really don't like us, you know? And even for the non-Jews who support Israel, they said, well, wait a second, there's a lot of people who don't like Jews enough that if I say anything in support of them, I'm going to be on that cancel ship too. So I think it's really important to understand like that it's not about anti-Semitism. right? Like you're saying it's not about the Palestinians or the Yemenis or anyone else. But I would say on the other side, it's also not about the people they blame it on. Like as much as anti-Semitism is a very, very real thing,
anti-Semitism is just scapegoatism.
It's scapegoatism to start, like we always say, it starts with the Jews, never ends with the Jews, right? Saturday people, then Sunday people, right? They're coming for us first because they're coming for everyone else next, because the destruction of this Western ideology of democracy and freedom is threatening to them.
And also because Jews are the most acceptable people to kill.
Right, of course, yeah.
So if they can open the door by killing Jews and everyone's saying this is fine, then they can set the precedent for killing everyone where everyone accepts it.
Right, because now they've convinced 23 and 24-year-olds that like murder is okay.
Yeah, and that's
not just murder.
That's exactly what they're saying.
They convinced 24-year-olds that murdering a 2-year-old who was 9 months old when he was originally kidnapped is okay.
I mean, they're celebrating this Luigi Mangione guy now, right? Because they're like, oh, but you don't understand. This is about, and I'm like, no, you don't understand.
Yeah.
You really don't understand what's happening right now.
Right.
And it's the fact that nobody gave a rat's behind. And they were like, yeah, but why should we sympathize with blah, 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 blah? It's like, you should be concerned about the fact that you are opening the killing matrix. Do you not understand that? They don't.
Yeah. And so that's the killing matrix. That's
what I call it.
I'm going to use that. I hope
no,
you don't mind.
because it's in my book.
Okay.
Yeah.
When's that book coming out?
You can use it after the book comes out.
After it comes out? Do you want to tell our audience when your book's coming out?
When I finish writing
When you finish writing it? Okay.
When I get out of it.
When we finally let her go.
Stop inviting me places.
Yeah. No, don't stop inviting her places. Yeah, don't stop, because you will be very, very grateful to have Elica come speak. I'm not her manager or her representative, but I'll tell you, because I don't think I've told you yet, but I've gotten really phenomenal feedback so far from everything we had last night. People were really, really thrilled to hear from you. And I could talk to you forever. We do have to wrap up soon, but I have a few more just quick questions I wanted to just ask. And so talking, just to stay on that note of this, Luigi Mangione and all these, the glorification of these people that are self-immolating on the streets, all this mayhem. So what I was trying to say earlier was like, I don't believe that it's just anti-Semites and crazy people. And I believe there are like very smart people overseas that are orchestrating this, that are putting people in the right places, putting the Charlotte Cateses. You might not know. You know Sammy Dune? So Sammy Dune is essentially the organization that brings money in from overseas to fund SJP and all these, right? And Charlotte Cates is a Canadian who maybe I'm better off not saying much more about at this point. Lost my train of thought completely, but right, these people, it's not a coincidence, right? Like they're putting certain people in certain places to affect messaging, to make it seem like it's very innocuous,
organic,
free Palestine, whatever. But then all of a sudden you look at the encampments and you get the bird's eye views from the helicopters and you're like, wait a second, every one of those tents looks the exact same. Oh, that's interesting. You go to the rallies. Oh wow, all of their signs look like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's clearly well orchestrated. There's clearly money, and ideology, and thought and real brainstorming.
There's a word for it. It's called astroturfing.
Astroturfing.
Yeah.
Like putting turf in a field.
Yeah. So astroturf, I guess, is that it's not real grass, but it looks like real grass.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, this is great.
Yeah. So the concept is something that looks like it's real, but it's not.
Yeah.
I first heard the term through when it was discovered that PR firms were doing this essentially when they wanted to smear people. So what they would do is that they would put out these rumors behind these like little bot accounts, which is actually what they did to me. They did astroturfing for ages. IRGC was doing astroturfing where they would copy and paste. Like I would wake up and see my Twitter thing and it would just be flooded with copy paste message, the exact same messaging, whatever the messaging of the day was, IRGC, Mossad, Simon Le Bon, whatever. And it was copy, and every single account was like 0 followers, 0 following. And they would just copy paste it everywhere to the point that people would start picking it up, and then people would start saying it and then it would look like an organic movement. And so that's exactly what they do with this type of organization. It does a lot of astroturfing, right? It like plants the seeds here and like organizes this and, gets resources for this and that, so that when it comes onto the world stage, it just looks extremely organic.
Yep.
And people are like, these are just, people with bleeding hearts who are genuinely upset and who are genuinely out there protesting and and it's like, no, that's astroturfing.
Yeah. They've literally managed to.
You can say astroturfing because That's
can
not
say
my
it?
word.
Okay, it's not on your book? Okay.
Yeah, go.
Thank goodness.
Go take.
I will take it. I will take it. And I might just copyright it too, so you can't take it.
Oh.
Touche.
Touche.
Shoes on the other foot.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, they've effectively, in many cases, they did hire actors to come to their protests, but they've also managed to kind of like hire actors who don't even realize they're acting. Right. They've managed to like put this information in front of people that are naive enough to just be like, oh, okay, this sounds fun. Let's go do this now with our time, because they are people who, from my best estimation, don't have anything better to do with their time.
Exactly.
Right. That are sitting at home desperately looking for a cause to take on. And more importantly, sorry for all of you listening to this that are not going to be happy to hear this, but they don't have anyone else in their lives. They don't have the friends or the family to lean on. So they found this movement that they could go stand in a drug-filled encampment in the cold for 3 weeks, or 3 months in some cases, and feel like they had a family for the first time.
Yeah.
You know? Okay, so just because we're coming close to the end of time, I did want to, just before we wrap up, ask you a couple of questions going back to Iran. So first of all, just a short answer. The son of the Shah currently is living in LA.
Yeah, I think he lives on the East Coast.
Oh, okay. Yeah. He's living in America.
Yes.
Do you think there is potential there for him to unify enough people outside of Iran to somehow create, maybe is it a government in exile eventually? Like, does he have the opportunity to
I mean, he has the opportunity to do so. It's going to be more so whether the people find it within themselves to do that. Unfortunately, we do have a history of being quite ideologically divided. And on the basis of being ideologically divided, it has been very difficult for Iranians in the past to come together. And I always use the example of no matter what your ideology is during World War II, the communists and the capitalists, the Soviet Union and the West even came together to defeat Nazi Germany, right? And so it's like just a fundamental principle of overthrowing any regime is that you have to be united. So the Crown Prince Shahzadeh Reza Pahlavi, what he represents is a figure who is, I mean, he's the heir apparent to the throne, and he represents a figure that can provide a meaningful challenge to the regime. And in recent times, he has come out and said that he's willing to be that person. So it's just going to be whether the Iranian people in the diaspora, I mean, most people in Iran are behind him, I believe the polls suggest, but whether the Iranians in the diaspora will, stand up and rally behind him in order to just support him to the point that he becomes a figure for a transitional government that through democracy, the people can elect what they would like for Iran thereafter.
Okay, and in 1 or 2 sentences, right now feels like the Iranian economy is in shambles and will only get worse with Trump sanctions. The proxies, Iran's proxies, weaker than ever before. The reputation in the community has seemed. Is this the moment for Iran?
I mean, I don't want to get my hopes up. I've been feeling these moments quite a few times over the course of the past 3 years. I really hope so. A lot of people are saying this is the weakest they've ever been. But it's so upsetting to get your hopes up and then find out that it's not. So I'm just really, really hoping that this is the moment.
I hope so.
Yes.
Elica, thank you so much for joining us. It's been the greatest pleasure to listen to you speak. I appreciate not only your support for our community, but the fact that you continue to do it in the face of all the adversity you're facing. And as I told you last night, I want you to know that not only do we appreciate your support, but we share it, we reciprocate it, and we are standing with you always in your fight against the IRGC.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Elica.
Thank you.